7 military orders, not just knights, hospitals that ran like war machines, lepers turned into fearless cavalry, married crusaders building dynasties, northern warlords so brutal even the Pope stepped in, and women who held a city when the army fled. At the top, 9 poor knights who became the bankers of kings, until one ruler wiped them out in a single day. These are the top 7 military orders, the Knights Hospitaller, the healer warriors of the Mediterranean. If you walked into an 11th century infirmary, the beds are full of wounded pilgrims, but the men tending to them aren't just monks. Underneath their dark robes, you hear the clinking of chainmail. This is the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem. Founded around the year 1070, this organization started with a purely humanitarian mission. But by the 1120s, under their second Grand Master, Raymond Dupuy, everything changed. The Hospitallers realized that healing pilgrims wasn't enough if those same pilgrims were being slaughtered on the roads. The order militarized. Watch their visual transformation unfold. From simple monks, they rapidly reorganized into a disciplined militia divided into 3 strict ranks: noble knights, heavily armed men-at-arms, and non-combatant chaplains. The battlefield instantly recognized them by their scarlet surcoats, emblazoned with a striking white 8-pointed cross. What made the Hospitallers terrifyingly effective was their dual identity. They were not just elite heavy cavalry, they were combat medics. Because a majority of these knights received extensive medical training, they possessed a logistical advantage unseen in medieval warfare. They operated a massive hospital in Jerusalem, capable of accommodating over 1,000 patients. Yet, on the battlefield, they were the ultimate shock troops, anchoring the flanks of Crusader armies in over 25 major engagements. Look at the sheer scale of their escalation. When the Crusaders were pushed out of the Holy Land, the Hospitallers didn't dissolve. They adapted. They retreated across the Mediterranean, seizing the island of Rhodes and later Malta, transforming themselves into a devastating naval superpower. They built the strongest maritime defenses in the world. The ultimate test of their legacy came in 1565 during the legendary siege of Malta. A tiny garrison of Hospitaller knights found themselves trapped in Fort St. Elmo, surrounded by a massive Ottoman-Turkish armada. Day after day, the fortress was pounded to rubble by naval artillery and swarmed by elite Janissary infantry. But the Hospitallers refused to yield. When the walls finally fell, the Ottoman commanders were met with an unbelievable sight. The last surviving Hospitaller knights, severely wounded and unable to stand, had ordered their comrades to prop them up in wooden chairs in the breach. They sat in the rubble, swords in hand, swinging at the invaders until they were cut down. The Hospitallers proved that a healer's hands could wield a blade with unmatched ferocity. But while the Hospitallers fought to save lives, our next order required its members to have already lost theirs. The Order of Saint Lazarus, the Leper Knights of Jerusalem. Picture a line of heavily armored knights preparing for a cavalry charge. But as the wind blows back their cloaks, you see missing fingers, bandaged faces, and skin ravaged by disease. In the Middle Ages, contracting leprosy was an absolute death sentence. You were stripped of your property, declared legally dead, and cast out of society to ring a bell warning others of your approach. But in the Holy Land, there was one place where outcasts were handed a sword and a purpose. Founded in the 12th century, shortly after the Hospitallers, the Order of Saint Lazarus was a military institution like no other. It was established originally to care for those afflicted by leprosy, running specialized hospitals known as leprosaria. However, as the Crusades intensified, the order evolved. Healthy knights from other orders who contracted the disease were immediately transferred here. The mechanism of this order turned a biological nightmare into a psychological weapon. These men knew they were going to die. They had no future, no families to return to, and physical pain was a constant reality. This made them fearless. When the Lazarites took the field, they wore a green cross. Enemies who realized they were fighting lepers were often struck with terror, both from the horrifying appearance of the knights and the profound medieval dread of infection. Consider their sheer defiance at the Battle of La Forbie in 1244. The Christian forces were facing overwhelming odds against a massive Ayyubid army. The leper knights rode directly into the epicenter of the carnage alongside the Templars. They fought with a suicidal brilliance because survival was never their goal. The entire contingent of Lazarite knights was practically wiped out in that single engagement, dying as martyrs rather than wasting away in a hospital bed. The Order of Saint Lazarus completely flipped the medieval paradigm. They took society's most wretched, untouchable victims and elevated them into elite holy warriors. But while the Lazarites sacrificed their very bodies for the crusade, another group of knights found a massive loophole in the strict monastic rules of holy war. The Order of Santiago, the married crusaders of Iberia. Swearing an oath to a military order almost universally meant taking vows of absolute poverty, complete obedience, and strict celibacy. No wealth, no wives, no bloodline. But in the mid-12th century, on the sun-baked, blood-soaked plains of Spain, a new breed of knight emerged. This is the Order of Santiago, named after the patron saint of Spain, Saint James the Greater. Founded in the 1150s in the Kingdom of Castile, their original mission was to protect Christian pilgrims traveling the treacherous roads to the shrine of Santiago de Compostela. But the mechanism of their order completely broke the mold of traditional military monasticism. The Order of Santiago allowed its knights to marry. They could own private property. They lived in communities with their wives and children, while still dedicating their lives to the brutal frontier warfare of the Spanish Reconquista. This was a massive escalation in how a crusade was fought. Because they were not restricted by the celibate monastic rules of the Templars or Hospitallers, the Order of Santiago became highly attractive to the Spanish nobility. You didn't have to give up your dynasty to fight for God. You could build generational wealth. Look at the map of the Iberian Peninsula rapidly filling with their strongholds. The Order's membership swelled, eventually allowing them to govern over 400 separate properties and field a standing army of 1,500 men, including 400 elite heavy cavalry knights. Their real-world impact culminated in the unification of Spain. The Knights of Santiago were the tip of the spear in the centuries-long war to push the Moorish forces out of Iberia. They amassed so much land, wealth, and military leverage that they became a state within a state. Eventually, the Spanish crown realized that whoever controlled the Order of Santiago controlled Spain itself. By 1522, the monarchy formally annexed the order, merging its vast power directly into the royal throne. They won their crusade by breaking the rules of monkhood. But while the Iberian knights fought for their homeland, deep in the freezing, uncharted forests of the north, a very different kind of crusade was unfolding, one built entirely on brutal, unforgiving conquest. The Livonian Brothers of the Sword, the brutal warlords of the Baltic. When we think of crusades, we picture the deserts of the Middle East. But pan the map straight up to the freezing, dense pine forests of modern-day Latvia and Estonia. Here, in the year 1202, Bishop Albert of Riga unleashed a nightmare upon the pagan tribes of the Baltic. He created the Livonian Brothers of the Sword. The concept was simple but ruthless. The bishop needed a permanent, standing army to forcefully convert the local pagans and secure his commercial trading hubs in the north. The Sword Brethren adopted the strict vows of the Knights Templar: poverty, obedience, and celibacy. They wore striking white mantles adorned with a bright red sword and a cross. But make no mistake, these men were not humble monks. They operated like an organized crime syndicate in heavy armor. Their mechanism of control was raw terror. Instead of living in quiet monasteries, the knights lived in heavily fortified district castles, each ruled by a military chief who acted as a local warlord. They employed a massive auxiliary force of soldiers, artisans, and administrators to extract wealth from the land. Within just 4 years of their founding, they were constructing massive stone fortresses, carving a bloody path through Latvian tribes, and forcibly annexing entire regions of southern Estonia. But their escalation into absolute savagery was their undoing. The Sword Brethren were so vicious, so relentlessly brutal to both pagans and newly converted Christians alike, that the Pope himself had to officially reprimand them for their horrifying fighting tactics and blatant insubordination. The consequences caught up with them in 1236 at the Battle of Saula. The Livonian Brothers marched into a swampy, heavily forested trap set by an alliance of Baltic tribes. Unable to maneuver their heavy war horses in the mud, the Sword Brethren were systematically slaughtered. Their Grand Master was killed, and their military strength was instantly shattered. But the remnants of this decimated army did not just fade into history. They were absorbed by another northern order, an order that didn't just want to win battles, but intended to engineer an entire, unstoppable empire.
The Teutonic Knights, the architects of the monastic state.
What happens when a military order decides that serving a king is a waste of time? They build a country of their own. Meet the Order of Brothers of the German House of St. Mary, universally feared as the Teutonic Knights. Originating in the year 1190 as a simple field hospital during the siege of Acre in the Holy Land, this order quickly realized they could never outcompete the Templars and Hospitallers in the Middle East. So, under the brilliant leadership of Grand Master Hermann von Salza, they packed up and shifted their gaze to the pagan frontiers of Eastern Europe. The mechanism of the Teutonic Knights was terrifyingly efficient statecraft. They didn't just raid, they industrialized conquest. Invited to the Baltic by a Polish duke to help repel pagan raiders, the Teutonic Knights brought in German peasants, built massive brick castles, and established an independent, sovereign nation, the state of the Teutonic Order. They treated warfare like an extreme sport, inviting young, wealthy aristocrats from across Western Europe to join them on seasonal crusades known as Reisen, or raids, turning the extermination of the local pagans into a high society event. The escalation of their power was absolute. Watch the maps turn black and white. They dominated the Baltic Sea trade, built their own naval fleets, minted their own currency, and ruthlessly crushed the native Prussian population, replacing them with German settlers. They were clad in stark white surcoats bearing a bold black cross, a symbol that would strike fear across Europe for centuries. But their arrogance led to an apocalyptic clash. Having run out of pagans to fight, the Teutonic Knights turned their heavy cavalry against the Christian Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. This culminated in 1410 at the catastrophic Battle of Grunwald. In one of the largest battles of the Middle Ages, the Polish-Lithuanian coalition completely shattered the Teutonic army. 50 of the Order's top 60 commanders were slaughtered on the field. The invincible aura of the Teutonic Knights was broken forever, reducing them to a shadow of their former glory. But while these men built a nation of iron and stone, our next order proves that the defense of Christendom wasn't solely a brotherhood. The Order of the Hatchet, the heroines of Tortosa. Zoom in on the year 1149. The setting is the city of Tortosa, located in the Catalonia region of Spain. The Second Crusade is raging. Christian forces under the Count of Barcelona have just achieved a massive victory, capturing the city from Muslim control. Assuming the region is secure, the Count marches his main army away to fight on other fronts, leaving Tortosa completely exposed. Seeing the vulnerability, the Moorish armies launch a lightning-fast, devastating counterattack to retake the city. The remaining local men, terrified and outnumbered, suggest surrendering. But the women of Tortosa refuse. The concept here defies every traditional convention of medieval warfare. Seeing the men falter, the women of the city take matters into their own hands. They do not have armor. They do not have broadswords or heavy cavalry training. They grab whatever is available: axes, pitchforks, and hatchets. The mechanism of this defense was pure, unadulterated desperation and rage. The women rush the breached walls. They stand shoulder to shoulder in the rubble, swinging their hatchets with such breathtaking ferocity that they completely break the morale of the invading army. The Muslim forces, stunned by the sheer violence of the civilian women, are successfully repelled and forced to retreat. The escalation of this event rippled all the way up to the highest courts of Spain. When the Count of Barcelona hears of this miraculous defense, he is so deeply moved and impressed that he creates a military order exclusively for them: the Order of the Hatchet. The real-world consequence was unprecedented. These women were officially granted extraordinary privileges. They were exempt from all taxes. They were given the right to wear military apparel, and in public assemblies they were legally granted precedence over men. Though it was a short-lived honorific order that died out with its original members, the Order of the Hatchet remains a legendary testament to the fact that when the walls crumble, the fiercest holy warriors aren't always the ones wearing chainmail. But now we reach the apex. We've seen healers, lepers, warlords, and heroines, but none of them achieved the godlike power of the organization that bought the medieval world, only to pay the ultimate price.
The Knights Templar, the warlords of global finance. 9 impoverished knights walking into the dusty ruins of Jerusalem. That is how it started in 1119. They approached the king of Jerusalem with a simple pitch: "Let us protect the pilgrims on the roads." The king gave them a headquarters on the Temple Mount, the site of the biblical Temple of Solomon. Thus, the Knights Templar were born. But their concept quickly mutated from guarding dirt roads to inventing modern global finance. The mechanism was genius. Traveling with gold across medieval Europe was a death wish. Bandits were everywhere. The Templars created a solution. A pilgrim in London could deposit his life savings at a local Templar house. In return, he was given a cryptographically coded piece of paper. He could then travel thousands of miles to Jerusalem, hand that paper to a Templar clerk, and withdraw his exact funds. This simple system triggered an unprecedented escalation of wealth. See the gold flowing into their vaults. The Templars became the world's first multinational megacorporation. While their heavily armored battle brothers, the mere 10% of the order who actually fought, garnered a terrifying reputation as elite shock troops, the other 90% built an empire. They owned vast fleets of ships. They owned the entire island of Cyprus. They bankrolled the wars of European kings. And thanks to the Pope, they paid 0 taxes and answered to no king's law. Look at their sheer military dominance at the Battle of Montgisard in 1177. A severely outnumbered force of just 500 Templar knights, alongside the leper king Baldwin IV, charged directly into the center of Saladin's army of 26,000 men, utterly shattering the Islamic forces. But their untouchable status bred deep paranoia and envy. King Philip IV of France had borrowed catastrophic sums of money from the Templars to fund his wars. He was effectively bankrupt, and the Templars held his debt. The consequence was the most infamous betrayal in history. At dawn on Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip launched a highly coordinated, simultaneous raid across France. Templars were dragged from their beds. The king accused them of unimaginable heresies: spitting on the cross, idol worship, and dark magic. Through horrific torture, false confessions were extracted. The final blow came in 1314. The last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay, was dragged to an island in the Seine River in Paris to be burned alive at the stake. As the flames licked his body, he retracted his false confessions and screamed a curse, summoning both the king and the pope to meet him before the judgment seat of God within the year. Both King Philip and Pope Clement died within months. The Templars were officially disbanded, their unimaginable wealth scattered, and their legacy forever shrouded in mystery. Look at what these organizations truly were. We are conditioned to view crusaders as one-dimensional zealots holding swords and shields. But the reality is far more terrifying and brilliant. These military orders were the ultimate synthesis of religious fanaticism, corporate efficiency, and military supremacy. The Hospitallers pioneered large-scale medical logistics while holding the line against empires. The Order of Santiago unified a continent. The Teutonic Knights engineered a sovereign state out of sheer willpower and brick. And the Templars birthed the very concept of international banking. They were states within states. They operated beyond the jurisdiction of kings, answering only to God and their grand masters. They show us that the pursuit of a holy cause inevitably leads to the accumulation of absolute worldly power. They built the infrastructure of the modern world with one hand, while swinging a broadsword with the other. If you want to see more deep dives into the forgotten, brutal truths of history, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me in the comments. Which of these military orders do you think was the most dangerous? See you in the next one.